Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about police accountability. I have a couple of guests who have worked on this issue, especially as it relates to the Michael Brown killing and the VonDerrit Myers killing. I have Michael T. McPhearson with Veterans for Peace, and I have John Chasnoff, who is with the Don't Shoot Coalition. I want to welcome both of you to the show. And just ask you, what do you mean when you say police accountability, John? What does that phrase mean?
Well, I think it basically comes back to the idea that the police derive their powers from the citizens who give up some of their power to a special group of folks to enforce the laws. And so those people have to be held accountable back to the citizens of any community. And there's a variety of ways to do that. The general idea is that the citizens really run the community and are the ones who hold their servants accountable.
Okay. Now, Michael, do you think that's being done in St. Louis in the case of there's been a whole lot of discussion about police killings of civilians. Do you think that accountability is happening in the
Well, no, and it hasn't been for a long time. And really, John can speak even clearer to that. But, I've lived in St. Louis off and on for 18 years. And the first time I was here, we were trying to pass a police review board, citizens review board. And I guess we're closer to actually making that kind of thing happen. But that's been going on for 20 years where we've been trying to hold the police accountable. So no, it's not happening. And I think we can see that in many other protests that have happened over the past 3 months, and how the police very quickly move in and treat people who are protesting peacefully as if they're doing something criminal. So no, there's not true accountability at this point.
Well, I remember at the beginning of the protest of the Michael Brown killing, didn't they issue a rule that says you can only protest for something like, what, 5 minutes?
5 seconds.
5 seconds?
You couldn't hold still or stand still for more than 5 seconds. You had to keep moving.
Right. Okay, and then that was knocked down, wasn't it?
It was, and it shows one of the ways that we hold the police accountable, which is through the courts. So the ACLU took that case and got that 5-second rule overturned. And just recently there was another lawsuit in early December where the police were held accountable for their indiscriminate use of tear gas. And the courts issued a temporary restraining order saying that they had to give people fair warning and allow exits. So the courts is one of our ways that we hold police accountable. We also do it through the legislature, and so the Missouri legislature starts every January, and so we're in a new session where we have a bunch of bills that have been proposed in response to Ferguson to start to hold the police accountable there too.
Okay, well, you're talking about the legislative system and the judicial system. Do you think that they might be likely to ignore you if there weren't demonstrators in the streets?
Oh, there's no doubt. They've ignored us for years and years. We don't have real police accountability. So we've had a racial profiling bill on the books, but every year it shows that the numbers are terrible. The disparities between black stops and white stops have grown over the course of that study.
What do you mean black stops and white stops?
So the racial profiling bill requires that police officers keep track of who they stop and what is the race of people they're stopped. And that law, that data has shown consistently that black people are stopped more, they're searched more, they're arrested more in disproportionate numbers to their population. And so even though those numbers have been collected, the police haven't really been held accountable for it. So we're trying to now go back and amend that law to put some real teeth into it so that the police departments could actually be decertified if they don't get their act together.
Oh, that's a very good point.
See, the thing is that any system will continue to maintain itself until some disruption takes place to where the system can't work. So as long as black people and white people were willing to allow this discrepancy in terms of how people were being treated, if we're going to continue to allow it to happen, then it's going to continue to happen. But what has happened now as a result of many deaths of young black men and black people being treated badly, but in particularly because of Mike Brown's death and the reaction of the community, people decided they're not going to take this anymore. So now they're disrupting the system, and the system wants to figure out, how to get back to some kind of equilibrium.
Right.
And in order to do that, they're going to have to make changes. And so slowly the changes are happening, and we're going to keep up the pressure to make sure we get what we're supposed to, be treated equally.
And I think one of the differences is that this time young people in the black community rose up and said, we're not going to go back to the old normal.
That's right.
The old normal is not peace. The old normal was violence against people of color.
That's right.
And so we've got to find a new normal where there's justice.
Now, one of the most memorable events, and it will be remembered in St. Louis history for a very long time, was the night of November the 24th, 2014. And that was the day that they announced that Darren Wilson was not going to be indicted.
Right.
Now, prior to that, there was work that groups were developing what were called rules of engagement. Were y'all involved in helping to develop those?
Yes, that was an initiative that came out of the Don't Shoot Coalition.
Okay.
And the idea was to put it back on the police because they'd been talking about violent protesters and they were ginning up the fear of that there was going to be a violent reaction from the protest groups. And really, the violence had been coming from the police departments. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation around rules of engagement was to put it back on the police and say, how are you going to behave? Mm-hmm. There are standards that you should adhere to. And we came up with 19 rules that we thought the police ought to adhere to if they were going to behave decently. Okay. And then ask them, so are you going to live up to this or not?
Okay, well, Michael, when those were, you were part of helping to draft those, weren't you?
No, John and some others drafted it.
When they were drafted,
yes.
Did the police say, well, these are good, these are good rules that we'll discuss with you and follow?
Well, they started off saying they could agree to some, and as we talked with them and the pressure was building, they agreed to some more. But it was very disappointing to see how they reacted once the actual verdict came down. And most of the things that they said they would do, they didn't live up to their agreements.
So it was pretty much business as usual the night of November the 24th.
Well, it was even worse, I believe. Some things were even out of their hands, I would say. For example, when the announcement came of the grand jury's decision, that came like at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. Right. That was the prosecutor's decision, and I'm sure the police didn't want that decision to be announced at nighttime, which is the most volatile time. So that situation was created, and some people could say on purpose, for there to be the kind of reaction it was. But one thing I want to say about the rules of engagement, we didn't put those together asking for special treatment. These rules of engagement were the way police should always treat people that are assembling, their constitutional right to assemble and their constitutional right for redress. So there was nothing in it that was asking for special treatment. This is just the best ways to police.
Okay. Now, we've been talking most about Michael Brown, but just a couple of months after that, October the 11th, 2014, VonDerrit Myers was killed in Shaw. And we're going to see a movie right now about the funeral of VonDerrit Myers. Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. We just saw the funeral of VonDerrit Myers. We're talking about police accountability, and I have with me guests who have worked on this issue a whole lot. I have John Chasnoff, who is with the Don't Shoot Coalition, and I also have Michael T. McPhearson, who's with Veterans for Peace. So we were talking before about what happened on the night of November the 24th, when the non-indictment came down, which said that Darren Wilson was not going to be held accountable for killing Michael Brown. And what sort of things did the police do on that night and during the following month that you think were not consistent with the way that police are supposed to behave?
Well, starting that night, they had a very heavy presence at the police department in Ferguson. But rather than giving people the street and allowing some kind of safety valve for people's emotions, they immediately ordered people off the street and then tear gassed the crowd without any warning. And meanwhile, over on West Florissant, there was no policing whatsoever. And so that turned into a chaotic situation where the police seemed to have decided to protect the government building in Ferguson, but let property in the heart of the black community just go up in flames.
Yeah, and that was amazing. I mean, people commented on that over and over again. That I remember the first night that right after Michael Brown was killed, people complained that there were people trying to protect stores and the police would not help them protect the stores. And then on November the 24th, they weren't even around where a lot of the stores were, and they were massing at other locations.
Yeah. Well, one thing, I'm sorry, I just have to say something about the prosecutor's office, and I know we're talking about the police, but they do,
well, they work together,
part of the whole system. The fact that, and maybe this would have been a special thing to do, but they should have done it. The fact that Michael Brown's family was not told of what the outcome was beforehand, and that they ended up finding out with everybody else. Number one, that's disrespectful, but most importantly, I think to the reaction of the community, Michael Brown's mother, she was wailing as any mother would, and that emotion was carried. That emotion was carried through the community. That didn't have to happen that way. And with it also being nighttime, and then the police reacting the way they did, it just created a powder keg that was going to explode. I mean, I don't know what else could have happened, and especially that, though, not telling the family in a respectful way so that...
Or even inviting the family to be with them at the time, or something that showed that they were concerned about
right, and that emotion could have been a private emotion. It was forced in many ways for it to be public, and that emotion carried through everybody. So we have to, I really think the system is the most responsible for what happened that night than anything.
And then they just weren't able to turn themselves off after that. For weeks after that decision came out, the police were stretching the unlawful assembly law, so they were ordering people to disperse improperly and denying people their right to assemble and their right to free speech. And once they declare these unlawful assemblies, then they can just indiscriminately arrest protesters for being there, for not dispersing quickly enough. And the same with tear gas. It was indiscriminately used on peaceful protesters without any warning, sometimes without any means to escape.
Yeah, that's what I've read about. It's called kettling, where they surround an area and they don't let people escape from it. So people who are trying to get away from the tear gas or even leave the demonstration can't do it. Have you heard of things like that happening?
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the reasons that a judge issued a temporary restraining order against the police department, the Unified Command, which was in charge of policing both in the city and the county, and told them that they had to give proper notice. They had to allow for people to escape the tear gas, and these were things that were not being done. So even in the courts, it was recognized that the police were violating the law.
Right. Well, let me ask you, in terms of long-term accountability, what sort of things would we be looking at in order to change the laws and the structure so that to reduce the degree of police violence and also the denial of constitutional rights?
Well, there's a lot of things out there, a lot of proposals on the table right now, but I think some of the key ones have to do with transparency in the police department and accountability to the citizens. So, for instance, there is a push to have a database, a national database of police killings, which it's remarkable that we don't even have that now. We don't know how many people are being killed by police. And so if we know, then we can react properly to the situation. That's a transparency measure, but also pushes like civilian review to get the citizens involved in police department matters, looking at procedures and policies and complaints against the department from a citizen's point of view.
But the criticism that I've heard of civilian review boards is that they're always going to be appointed by the same people who hire the police chief, and they'll always be top down, and it will never be true citizen involvement in the police review board. And even if there were a few activists involved, it would just take their time away from organizing people, and it would have them poring over hundreds of cases so that they wouldn't have any time to organize. What do you think about concerns like that?
Well, first of all, you can't say they're always going to be top down. You have to see each board and take its appointment process or selection process at face value. The one that looks like it will happen in St. Louis has some mechanisms for strong citizen input into the selection process. And so if the citizens really do their job and participate in that process, they can have a big say. And I don't think it's the organizers who will get on that board, but I think it's people who are allied, who understand the situation and who hold themselves accountable back to the community, who should be serving on those boards and taking on that responsibility.
But I think further to your point, something else has to change in order for, and the accountability we definitely have to have, right? But we have to change society. We have to change how the relationship between black and white people and between people with means and poor people, because the people of color and poor people are the ones who find themselves abused by the police and abused by the system in general. So we have something deeper that we must change. People can't be looking at black people and just automatically thinking they're criminals. And police officers can't just be scared because they are facing a black man. I mean, those are the type of things that we have to change, which means we have to change society. So the accountability part, in a way, is a stopgap measure that we have to do, but we have much further work to do than that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about this. You know, Darren Wilson and the person who killed VonDerrit Myers, they're not going to be indicted as of the end of 2014. But there's no statute of limitations on murder. Demanding that they be arrested, is that a central part of accountability?
Yeah.
I think it is, and it has always been one of the strong demands, and there's no reason for that to go away.
You know, so that demand, that the people responsible for the killings is not something that's going to disappear and will be there because there's no statute of limitations.
And even if they're never held responsible by the system, people are always going to look at them and hold them responsible. Darren Wilson is not going to be able just to go anywhere in the country and become a police officer again, because people are always going to hold him responsible. Always.
Okay, we're going to take a break and see a short movie about tear gas being used in the Shaw neighborhood, and then we'll get back, and we'll be back in just a minute.
It ain't right. It ain't right.
Please leave the area, or you will be placed under arrest.
People got arrested. We might as well stay here. Why are we leaving? So they got arrested for nothing.
It's not going to mess us up this way. It's not nothing this way. Why is everybody trying to run this? Let's go. If you want to get your ass,
This is what democracy looks like.
And we try to really hard to stay calm, and we try to stay calm and
Come on, everybody, we are moving.
not give in. And people
We
were
are
amazed.
moving.
I saw a member of the press showing his press badge and getting amazed.
Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. They're moving
A
on.
lot more military. And right now, as they're interested me in there. Yeah,
Come on, people, we are moving. Let's go.
They're spraying, they spraying, they spraying, they spraying, they spraying, they spraying.
Hey, get over here.
They need to get their ass. They come over here and get out the street. Everybody over there, get over here.
I work. I pay your bills. I am a taxpayer. And you pepper spray me?
It's our First Amendment right to peacefully assemble! Who are you serving? Not the Constitution!
No respect.
You're serving profit for banks!
Cut it out. I don't care.
Serve the people!
I don't care. Tell Chief Dawson I don't care.
We are a public side!
No respect.
Peacefully assembling!
Let's go here. I don't care.
They're coming. Yeah, they are. They're coming. They are positioning themselves to attack, and we don't really have an escape route because they've got us surrounded. If we go this way, they got us. If we go this way, they got us.
There's too many people that are truly down for the cause that are not going to stand there and let the police come in and charge them right there.
Everybody, let's go! Let's go!
I'm sorry. You gonna join us?
What's the next stop?
I think everybody's heading that way.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. With me, I have Michael T. McPhearson and John Chasnoff, and we've been talking about police accountability. Okay, we just have a couple of minutes left. What points, Michael, would you like the viewer to take with them about the whole topic that we've been covering?
I think there's two things. One thing we need is at least a regional, or state, but really a national registry, so that when a police officer is disciplined or fired or something like that, that he or she can't just go somewhere else and get a job, at least without the people knowing that this person has a problem. Another thing is people really need to understand that police accountability is crucial because they're the force in our system that can take our lives, and nobody else can do that, has that discretion, and that shouldn't happen that often, so we really need to hold them accountable.
Right. John?
Well, I'd say there are a number of reforms on the table now, and all of those are important. Body cameras with proper privacy protection policies, appointment of special prosecutor. I think we have to do a lot of those reforms on the state level so we get some consistency in our policing. But none of these reforms are going to make the huge difference. I really agree with Michael that there are fundamental shifts that have to happen, and those are both interior work in each of us and societal work on implicit bias and how we as a society check our implicit biases. But I think also we have to fundamentally change the relationship between the communities and the police departments and get control of our police departments again.
Okay, I think we've covered a whole lot of areas, a whole lot of topics in this, the whole issue of the killing of Michael Brown, the killing of VonDerrit Myers, the killing of Eric Gardner in New York City means that there has been a whole lot of things for us that we really need to think about. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank the viewers for watching, and be sure to tune in Green Time the same time next week.